From ContainerDays Hamburg, this video is proudly presented by DAX IT.
So you're interested in platform as a product. And for that, we did some research in the CNCF Platform Working Group. As you can see, the change between the yellow slide and the blue slide is also not just the color, but the ongoing is striked through. Oh my God, what happened? That's something to keep you on your toes for the talk, because we talk about that as well. But first, we get an overview on what the purpose of the research is, what we wanted to find out, what does even platform as a product and all that mean. Look at how we did the research, because I think that's also a very interesting topic. It was a research in an open source community, so that was challenging. And with that, we're at challenges of the research. There were plenty, spoiler. And then we will look at the research, some of the research results, some of the signals that we got, and talk about the future and why it's strike through and ongoing. Or is it? So we'll see that. Why am I talking about that? I'm the man in the middle. I'm Dominic, and I was one of the research leads that were working on that together with Dave and Michael. We were basically a bit of the facilitator, orchestrator of the research, and we're looking at how we can move that whole topic forward within the working group platforms of the CNCF. But because this was a clear open source research project, it's like not just us three, it was a lot of people that helped us in working through the topics, getting the research done and all that stuff. So it is really an open source project because it's part of the CNCF. So many people were involved, not just us three. All right, but what is the research about? What did we want to find out? Well, platform is a product, right? But what does that mean? For us, it was important to find product thinking practices and patterns and all that of platform builders. So teams that are actively building platforms, and what product thinking practices are they doing? Also, spoiler alert, even without naming them product thinking. So therefore, we looked at different themes and patterns that we could see in their daily work, like needs, pain points, what do they work with, what behaviors do they have. Then we tried to connect all of that data that we got to gain some deeper insights, and then came up with roughly user personas that we could use to drive our research forward. In the beginning, because there were two bigger projects next to the platform as a product within the working group, there was also a maturity model assessment. If you have seen the outcomes of the working group platforms in CNCF, there's also a platform engineering maturity model, which is awesome. You should definitely check that out. There's also a couple of talks around that. I think even somebody here, I bet. It's a very good topic, and check out the model. And they were also working on an assessment. So we didn't want to conflict in there. So we said we are just looking at, platform builder behavior and patterns. We're not looking at, what maturity are they in and all that. So we didn't measure success, which came in to haunt us at the end because we focused on a very broad topic, just with seeing how they do things. All right, so the research methodology, that was like a really big part, how we do that. And the base of every good research is data. So we were looking at data as well. We started with just focusing on qualitative data, doing interviews with platform builders in the beginning, right? Reaching out to people in the CNCF that were part of a platform engineering team, and then ask them, based on a fixed script that we built up beforehand, some questions. But we realized that this process was like way too slow in the beginning to get a really good, broad set of data. So in the research, we then started to translate those questions that we had for our interviews into surveys as well. And with that, build up quantitative data as well, with like a survey that you could do, just like that, with the script being the base of those questions. You can check out the interview script because everything is open source. It's under this QR code in Git repository. And we were looking at different assumptions that we had, especially coming out of the work in working with the platform maturity model, because in there, if you've already worked with a platform maturity model or seen it, like there is it's 4 levels of maturity that a platform engineering team can have. And there's a big shift between maturity level 2 and maturity level 3, where basically product management patterns are being brought into, and you understand your platform as a product when you shift from a more service-oriented approach in level 2 to the more product-oriented approach in level 3. And based on all of those assumptions that we had within the maturity model and the creation of the maturity model, we were looking at, what's interesting patterns that we want to see proven in the field. Before that, it was mainly assumptions, and we wanted to see, all right, do people, do platform builders actually work that way? And then we based, we created questions around that, but wanted to be very deliberate that we don't lead into, the answer that we are expecting, which also meant that there is no product management or, the product buzzword within the whole script. That was really important for us. We did look at different sections then, the background of people and the background of the organization, how the platform organization is working, how they do planning, how they prioritize work, all that, feedback, platform success, investment. And you can already see that's also strongly aligned to the different aspects of the platform engineering maturity model. So we really aligned well with, wanted to align well with the platform engineering maturity model. In the interviewing itself, we even had a really big interviewing guide for everybody who wanted to participate in those interviews. It was really important for us to have open questions that are aiming at understanding the processes of and patterns of the teams that were working on it. No leading questions, and I think that was also the hardest part, not resist jumping in with your own opinions, just listen. That was a very interesting thing that people explain to you how platforms are working, and you're like, oh yeah, okay. So interview scheduling was one of the biggest challenges because we needed to manage interviewing because it was open source, right? We had a lot of interviewers that volunteered and then a lot of interviewees, and matching them up was pretty hard. And especially because I'm German, we also looked at data privacy and made sure it's GDPR compliant and all that. So my American colleagues hated me for it, but I think it's worth it. We even came up with a nice interview process flow where we had a contact intake and then an interviewer recruiting, and we matched them up, found some scheduling that matched for them, and then the interviewer could put in the submission of the interview script that they basically the transcript of their meeting, and then the leads would anonymize that transcript, and you can actually also get, I think in a later slide, you can get the results anonymized as they are of those interviews and also of the survey. Survey questions is the same. It was pretty hard because translating the interview questions, you can see in the examples here, without being leading, without saying what's the right, what's the wrong answer in order to look good. So that was quite some work to translate from our open interview into, just click the boxes, right? And also we built up a lot of research tools and artifacts that definitely can be used for further research in the future, not just for that topic, but generally. And I think the CNCF has now a really good blueprint on how to do research. We also used AI with prompts and especially context at some point. And we were syncing everything with the working group platform sync. So like every 2 weeks we had a sync where we gave an update and then, you know, asked for more support or like showed what we had as results so far, and used Slack, the basically the CNCF Slack, with our own group for updates and organizing and all that. And here is the slide with the research data that is completely anonymized. You can check it out. Transcription wasn't always that nice, which was hard for the synthesis at the end. So there might be some weird language in there, but yeah, the data was quite interesting. So challenges that we faced along the research were definitely like a lot. The first was, as I already said, like we wanted to be very open in the research in the beginning, right? Just whatever patterns, not really if the patterns are successfully used or not. It's just whatever patterns in product management that platform teams are using. That was way too open-ended in my opinion. And so we took way too long to just get to a consensus on the goals that we want, on the questions that we want, and had so many interviewing questions. I think the initial script that we had over 100 questions. So that would be like a full day of interviewing. That was way too much. So that was a big challenge. Also, the motivation dropped significantly after a time, especially when it started to, you know, actually be work. A lot of the people, you know, were as open source, they were really motivated to, you know, help, but it was quite hard to, you know, then at the end actually put in the work. And we had a lot of no responses after a sign up from the interviewee, but also from the interviewers. And as I already said, we started at zero. Like the CNCF doesn't really have a lot of tools around how to do research and all that. So we had to build up all of that. That led to us basically having half a year without even starting with the research, just creating the environment around it. And yeah, so that was a lot of work. And the problem with all those challenges is that at the end, we just had a very small sample size in what interviews we did. I mean, it's not that small. We have like 7 interviews and around 30 survey results. I think that's all right, but it's like not empirical yet, right? And that's why we talk about signals that we've seen within our research and not necessarily insights, because, you know, it's a smaller sample size, but I think it's already showing us great results. So getting to those results, right? That's why you're here talking about actual stuff, not just, you know, how we do stuff. But for that, I need to be a bit more transparent on how we got to that, because it's at the end research, right? We want to be scientific and all that, and not just put out some things, but really, you know, have it grounded in data. And with the small sample size, we needed to be extra careful when working with assumptions to not just find the right answer that we want for our assumptions to be true. So what we did is like a bit of a scientific research where we look at the data and then try to create a theory out of that data, and then try to find as much possible support for it, or, you know, even don't find support for it, so that we have a supported or a dismissed assumption. And that's also, you know, signals that we are looking at, if the signals hold up or not. We, you know, had a long Miro board with like a bazillion post-its to analyze the quantitative survey data that was coming out of Google Forms. Google Forms already helped us well with like the analytics around it. And then, you know, Miro as a whiteboard. And for the qualitative data, we experimented a bit with, you know, with prompts and with agents and LLMs to really look into the data and try to find patterns, which was, again, like a year ago, where the models weren't that good yet. So, and also we weren't that good in working with those models. So that was quite a challenge, and especially like fine tuning the results and making sure the results are good. That led to a very big agent context. Like this was basically our prompt to find information, or one of the prompts. And back then we did not yet really know context engineering. We were still in the prompt engineering space of it, but this is already context. And that was also, like, as you know, quite a lot of work to really build up the right context that you need in order to work with those models. Our approach was basically, let's look at themes and insights, that like patterns basically that the LLMs could recognize across all of the interview scripts that we had, or the interview transcripts. Then give us traceability of the evidence, so really show us the quote that is related to why the agent thinks that's one of the insights, or multiple quotes, so that we really can prove or can understand where this pattern comes from. And then always human gut check, so we were always looking at the data then and analyzing it manually afterhand to see if it works. And the main challenge is like the same challenge that we still have with AI agents. It's like, this is definitely the droids looking for. Like, really, the mansplaining aspect of ChatGPT and so on, being really confident with the absolute biggest bullshit ever. So that was hard, because then they showed us patterns and proved our assumptions just because they want to make us happy. And also, they work differently, right? So it was not a robust bottom-up human-driven synthesis coming up with a theory and then testing the theory with the data, like in grounded, science and all that. And there were also issues with the scope. Like, one of the hardest fixes, or one of the hardest things that I had to work on, was that it started that it couldn't isolate the interviews that well. So it proved an assumption in interview 3 with data from interview 5. And that was like really grinding us down. So again, it took way longer than we anticipated to do all of that synthesis at the end, and then motivation dropped at some point because the CNCF announced the reorganization, and so we don't have that much synthesis data or synthesis insight signals from our data. But let's look at them anyways, right? So I have brought 3 interesting insights with me, and we use one to see how we came up with them. And that one was that was an assumption that was really dear to me, or to myself, that platform organizations use prioritization frameworks as like one of the main drivers of product thinking, very unconsciously. So a lot of platform teams already do product thinking, but they don't name it like that, right? That was my assumption, and we tested it. So we looked at the participants that state to not use any prioritization frameworks in our data, and then examined if those teams are using patterns associated with the prioritization frameworks, despite their claims, right? So in our data, we had like 17 out of 22 that said, we don't know or don't use them, which is like 77%, so stable data set there. And in the interviews, just 1 out of the 6 interviews that we had stated that they did use one, and that's 80% even there. So we have a good database for that. And then we looked at what are, how can we say that they use patterns that are associated to prioritization frameworks? So we looked at, a prioritization framework usually has some structured activities like interviews or focus groups, something like that. And then that insight has influence on the roadmap and their prioritization there. And then they have regular meetings to look that up. If you have those things, you do some structured activity, use that data to inform your roadmap, and then have regular meetings to revisit that, you basically use a prioritization framework in some sort. So looking at the use of structured data, 94% in the survey said they definitely use explorative activities, and 82% said, we're talking to our supported teams, which is basically their platform users, right? Their customers. So that is pretty. That's something basically nearly all teams are doing. In that, 88% said they're even doing 2 or more things, right? Having a focus group with office hours or whatever, and then talking to customers. In the interviews, it was like 100%. Everybody said we're gathering feedback or insights in some sort. In interview 5, where they looked at a KPI on how often, like how productive their user teams are, not their platform, but how often, how many builds their users running through the platform and how that develops, which is a quite interesting KPI. All right, the influence on the roadmap of that data. 88% said they use the feedback they got on those structured activities to inform their priorities, and 64% even documented in some sort of a product artifact. In the interviews, it looked a bit different. 100% said they are at least using a backlog to organize their roadmap. But most of the time we realized in the interviews that the objectives are really leadership driven, and the teams are having just limited autonomy on how they can change priorities. The example here from interview series 2, it's quite interesting, where they said, they have like CTOs and domain leaders gathering, doing high-level strategy or high-level goals, and then their team is has somewhat of an autonomy to prioritize the work, achieving those goals, but the high level still comes from the leadership. Good. Use of regular planning meetings, that was pretty easy again. 94% said they are using regular planning meetings, and 64% said, with at least monthly cadence. And there's also nearly always multiple roles in the planning meetings. 56% even have product roles in there. That number is so low because a lot of organizations didn't even have product roles, or no role that was designated or called a product role. In the use of the regular planning meetings and in the interviews, 100% do them, ranging from informal multiple times a week to like this monster in 003, which is one of my favorite quotes, where they have like a planning event that's going for a full week, and 700 people go and sit and define the roadmap. And there you can already see that maybe it wasn't the best idea to just look at patterns, but also you should look at the success of those patterns in some organizations, right? Because if it works, it works. I don't know. So you could say it's somewhat supported that platform organizations use prioritization frameworks even if they don't talk about that, right? Which means most of the platform organizations already use some sort of product patterns, even if they do it unconsciously and don't name it product patterns. Limited because like the grade of autonomy they have with those patterns is somewhat different from case to case. Another one is related to that, I think. It is that platform organizations struggle to define and operationalize measures of success. I just had the talk yesterday with somebody who said, who asked me on my opinion on the measurement aspect of the maturity model, and that this is always lagging behind a bit in comparison to every other aspect in the maturity model within organizations. I also feel that measuring success is something organizations have a lot of problems with when it comes to their platforms, because it is hard, really. But we were looking at different factors that played a role into that, and we found that most are measuring activity over impact, so not really outcome driven, but they often look at adoption and user instead of business value. success is often based on anecdotes. That team is better than they were before instead of real data. And as we've seen with the prioritization, that prioritization is often leadership driven and not really metric driven, right? And that's also something we've seen before. Platform teams have varied control over their work. We've found some relation between, if their relationship with business is closer as a platform team, they usually have higher level outcomes and then more autonomy underneath those outcomes. If they are further away from business, then they get more specific tasks, like we need that feature, instead of we need to drive this outcome. So, the more you coordinate with business as a platform team, the more autonomy you gain from it, which is an interesting insight from the research overall. Also, newer teams are more reactive, while older are more strategic, and so on. All right, coming to the last point, and why the ongoing is scratched out, the future of the research. We now have a lot of signals, or some signals, on product thinking patterns in tools that platform builders use. I think that's nice. There's definitely some issue with that. That's the question: are those product thinking patterns and tools actually successful? Make these tools, the organizations, faster or slower? That's the big question there. And for that, we need to find out what actually is successful, right? Is the highest maturity successful? What is that? And for that, we also need way more data than we currently have. And to get more data, we need a way better research organization than we had previously, because that was a bit too ad hoc in that sense. But I think there are interesting enough signals already with the 3 examples we have there, right? There is definitely way more in the data, and there's way more in collecting more and targeted data for assumptions that you have. Yeah, that's it. You need targeted data, which means you need more actionable outcomes that also organizations are interested in, so they can get some value out of it and sponsor it. And we need a clear direction for the research in the future. But there is a really big issue with that, which is that the Platforms Working Group and the tech app delivery that the Platforms Working Group was part of is officially dissolved by the CNCF tech reorganization. They have a couple of new tags and renamed some. It really makes sense. It's a good reorganization. Don't get me wrong there. But the Platform Working Group isn't existing anymore. But there's some good news, and you can find the details on that ticket if you want to really go into the political details of CNCF and platforms. We are working on the Cloud Native Platform Engineering Technical Community Group, quite a name, which is basically like the working group, just a technical community group, a bit more open. From there, we can launch some initiatives like a platform as a product research, as a CNCF initiative. Then we get more support, we have a clearer scope. So there is a lot going on behind the scenes of the CNCF to create those better organizational structures that we need for continuing this research. And I'm happy to be driving that a bit more once everything has settled and we have the first meetings of the research group. And that's it. Thank you.
Just for the sake of waiting for questions, I will just ask, so what are the next steps? But you told them, so that doesn't really work out very well.
Yeah.
But maybe we will get 1 or 2 more questions
Sure.
In a few seconds.
I mean, to the next steps, I think it's really worth, if you're interested, to join the Cloud Native Platform Engineering Technical Community Group. Quite a name.
What a name.
But it is, it's still, we try to keep the momentum of the working group with its regular things and discussions alive. And I think we succeeded in that. Here, shout out to Colin, who did a great job with that. And yeah, just join the meetings that will be coming. You can somehow see them on the CNCF page at some time.
That is a good question. What assumptions to you wasn't confirmed?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
It's a brilliant one.
So let me think about that a bit. I mean, we focused a bit on prioritization frameworks with the assumption of what platform engineering pattern they're using. One of the one of the assumptions that I had that I couldn't really prove that much was that platform teams already have some sort of a product person, like a product manager, product owner, or whatever, in their teams, even if they don't call it that. That was not really proven. As I said, you've seen it, 56% said they have a product person in those meetings. Sometimes these product persons were like across multiple teams and not like dedicated in a platform team. And most of the times, there was a team lead or a platform lead, where you could say it's a product focused, but then there's too many other roles. So I don't think that at least the organizations that we asked, or that we had in our data, really have that specific product-oriented role in most of their teams already. So that's one of the assumptions that didn't hold up.
Thank you. One last question. Did you find out how the organization measuring productivity of their users did that? Were there other findings how platform teams measured impact?
Yeah, also a good question. I mean, again, since the data is there and AI agents are way better now, you can definitely also do your own research with the data that we have, and hopefully you can find something if you're interested with that. I think we didn't do such a really big deep dive. I just know from one of the interviews that I personally did was one of the organizations that were the most mature from the data set that we had. And they had, a lot of already outcome-driven measurements on, how their factory is working and all that. But I can't tell you too much about it, actually, because the interview was a long time ago, and they were really keen on data protection. So I can't also name you what company it is. But they are great. So there is, a few companies that already figured out how they can align, business outcomes with their platforms. But that was also a big finding. Like, it's very, very few organizations that are already there. Most of the organizations, as we've seen with the one, are really looking at adoption. We've seen that adoption is the main driver of metrics throughout platform teams. Most of them really look at how many people are actually using the tools that they developed, which is, I think, a good starting point, but doesn't really show you how successful they are with those tools that they are adopting.
One really last question, because then it's really time for lunch. The most interesting thing was that closeness to business leads to freedom. Are there any additional desirable outcomes to having to fulfill high-level goals? Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a really interesting new framing of a future research around that. I think the problem that we had was from the beginning deliberately saying we don't look at how this drives maturity or how this drives success within platforms. I don't know what the idea behind that was, why we started it that way, but we did. And so I think it's hard to show recommendations when the questions are not really looking at or not really finding out how mature or how successful the different products or platforms are that we were looking at. So yeah, I think it's hard to give you more recommendations on that side, besides the ones that we put out at this time. But yeah, support the research, then we can...
Yes, absolutely. And the group, and I mean, everything in the initiative. Dominic, thank you so much for your insights. I really enjoyed them. I think you too. Maybe some warm round of applause.
All right. Then enjoy lunch.
From ContainerDays Hamburg, this video is proudly presented by DAX IT.